I think we're good. All right, perfect. We got a bunch of questions, so we're going to try to cover as many of them as we can. There will be some redundancies, and we may openly admit to that as well when they happen. There are certainly some similarities in the questions as well, but we have a lot of questions, so we're going to try to do our very best to get through it without boring anyone too much. And Colin, let's just dive right into it. Paulo Nunes here talks about automatic performance mode. Let the library choose to correct the articulations based on speed and strength of playing.
I think that's always what we're going for, is to have the software get out of your way as much as possible and not have 1,000 NKIs and instruments to deal with.
Yeah.
And so yeah, no, I agree. Like I think one example would be your legato patches being able to, excuse me, intelligently hop from short notes, non-legato into legato seamlessly versus kind of this fragmented approach that we've, and I think a lot of developers, everybody's kind of inching forward on that, but I still think it can be pushed further.
Sure. And Paulo's, I think he's also speaking to the intuitive nature of it. For example, he suggests that I'm not saying that the library should behave like this per default, but the option to do so would be nice. A long sustained note, for example, maybe the library would think that a nice long PPP MP arc would be appropriate for the given tempo, time signature, and scale. So essentially, the tool would adapt to tempo as well. I think there's certain things we can definitely do in that direction. I don't know if there's so many different styles of music. I don't know if tempo is the only thing dictating, and you can have a beautiful soft composition running at 150. It doesn't necessarily dictate the style of music. But I understand the question, like the whole idea of the tool being more intuitive, and when you play fast, it automatically knows you're playing staccatos. If you hold it down, you'll get a marcato and all that stuff. So this will definitely do what's technologically possible in that direction. And I think one of the core concepts that we've talked about for years now is really the notion of sort of getting a little away from the UI, the key switching, this madness of CCs, all that stuff, and really have stuff that intuitively works on the keys. So I think the whole nature of this question is absolutely in the direction of what we've been discussing, and certainly accomplished with brass as well.
Oh yeah. The even you were talking to Blake Neely, and he was talking about how nobody, a working composer in Hollywood, film or television, has no time to sit there and dive into options. It needs to sound great and be diverse. So I think that's definitely our goal. It's just I would say in every way we can, simplifying, but obviously that's not going to change the depth that we approach the sampling of the instruments with. And
I think that's really the crux of we're always going to be battling simplicity versus wanting to have control. And there are a lot of things that we've figured out lately in terms of how to make things more intuitive on the keys, but there are certain complexities involved once we get into run building, faster playing styles, different types of legatos, surdinos. There are certain things that you just have to be able to control as well. But the whole concept of having the built-in experience is absolutely what we're trying to achieve here. Let me move on. We've got a lot more questions. Barry is asking, I would like to see minor and major thirds and perfect fourth unmeasured tremolos across violins, violas, and cellos. They seem to be non-existent in libraries, Vienna included, which is frustrating because I use them extensively for live ensemble writing, but it's difficult to do in mock-ups. Unmeasured tremolos.
I mean, that's an interesting suggestion. It's a neat texture.
Yeah.
Particularly, I think, at the light dynamics. So we would definitely consider that in the art list for sure. Yeah.
It was actually funny, and it definitely touches upon something that we've learned for working with brass as well. That, for example, I was listening to Williams' Force Awakens soundtrack last night, and I realized there's so much subtlety and chaos in the score as well. But a lot of it was really in a much lower dynamic range. It wasn't all fortissimo, and there are certain textural effects that were just sort of much more low-key. And it's definitely something we'll be talking about a lot today, that there's been a tendency in sampling for many years, and we've certainly done as well, that we sample upwards. So we sort of wanted all the fortissimo, and everybody wants to do their epic stuff, and we surely have that as well. But really try to go lower in the more playable range. And we'll get much more into it, but I think it's an important part, and I think it touches a little upon this also in terms of having these quite like common articulations actually, but just sample them in a more sort of subtle way. And also in terms of scaling, like that we're not just going to stay with minor and major, but we could potentially go further than that. I think that's important.
No, I agree. I think that depth in the softer, more nuanced dynamics versus, I mean, Expressivo is, we think, oh, you know, loud, and whatever, but it's actually not. I think the sweet spot's actually on the softer side. So yeah, I think focus there for sure.
It really is, and also it's funny because when you listen to so much dreadful epic music today, that it starts immediately at 40, and then the only has a dynamic range to go to fortissimo, and that's kind of it. So the music gets, I'm almost like, when I listen to it now, it feels like listening to heavy rock. I can like do 4 or 5 minutes and then I'm just done. I can't listen to it anymore because there's no dynamic flexibility in the score. So by sort of lowering the whole thing or spreading it out, so we cover more of the deep side or the soft side of things up to the more expressive stuff, but really pay equal attention to the whole thing. That's why I think when I say, and I think most people who work with mockups understand when I say most developers, if not all, have sampled upwards because we wanted the audible thing. And it's tricky to sample in the low layers as well because of noise and stuff, but it's something that has to be done to create more lifelike mockups, besides from having the right players and sort of the emotional investment as well. We have Dominik Spikalski, forgive me the name pronunciation, a product that's clean of taps and bumps, the ones which clearly sound like an error as opposed to perfect imperfection a la bow noise, especially when the instrument on one side of the stereo field is playing a note, while the microphone on the opposite side picks up noise like something just fell on the floor. So I suppose he's speaking out like he doesn't want to have too many natural artifacts in it, sort of finding the sweet spot of perfect imperfection.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I mean, there's just challenges that we dealt with in Adagio in the church environment that we don't deal with in our new recording environment.
Yeah.
We're never going to be about like over-RXing and making it sterile, but I understand what he's saying, like shifts in the stereo image, because I mean Adagio was very, very wide, which has some advantages too, to be fair. But
sure.
Yeah, no, I think invariably Century brass and strings are going to be a lot cleaner.
Yeah, and I think it's if you look at pretty much all current generation of string libraries, with the exception of VSL, are suffering from the room issues. We certainly faced them on Adagio as well. There's problems with legato transitions, the right programming, finding the right balance between it. So for us, we've been really spending a long time on not just figuring out new recording techniques, casting players and all that stuff, but also really figuring out what the right space. And we've had, God knows, we've had months of space conversations in terms of figuring out like the ideal space and what does that mean for the particular way and philosophy of the way we're going to approach this whole project. And we got it right with brass, so that's why and one of the reasons we've been eager sort of to announce strings as well is that we finally figured out the space that was really right for our philosophy of sampling, and I think it's going to carry through.
No, I agree. I think we're at this point. You need a certain degree of tightness, but you also need air. And if not, sometimes you can get tight but plastic sounding. Yeah. Or you can also get kind of an ambient wash. I mean, it's wonderful, lush, but when you actually start producing something in a track, it can be too much. So it's kind of finding that sweet spot.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think we've done that.
100%. And I think that it is an issue with very ambient libraries that they sound beautiful at a sort of per note basis, but for productions they tend to get very wet. It can be hard to just get them to fit, and they don't sound really that tight. Like if you listen, Williams is a really good example. Like, so the last Star Wars, how tight the score was. They recorded at a smaller stage. I think they didn't record in London this time, but over here. But
I think it was Sony. I think
Yeah, and just that. But it's just sort of everything stood out, and you can still make it wet if you want. But it just had a nice tight sound. Everything burns a little more actually. So it's kind of funny that and we learned the same thing with trumpets, for example. We've done obviously the largest orchestra ever sampled, and we realized, like, for example, with French horns, we've done over 20 French horns, and you find there's 6 right players, the right room, the right recording techniques, and it actually sounds bigger than 20 of them. Yeah,
like the big hall or church or whatever can swallow things up more.
Yeah.
Versus kind of, I'd say the Skywalker sound is like there's walls to it, so you get more of the burn and the detail. And I think the more for myself, getting into this, mock-ups through the years, and what your ear pays more attention to it just develops phrasing detail.
Yeah.
Where I think mock-ups I used to think sounded good years ago. I listen to them now, I'm like, gosh, that's a sluggish mess. I don't like that. And I think
I totally agree with that. It's really interesting, particularly when I listen to my old stuff. Like it's so dusty as well. Like obviously there's just in terms of like just EQing a little bit and getting the perspective right, everything, it just sounds dusty and wet. I was surely more happy on the reverb button. I would say almost over the years, just slightly just dialing the reverb down.
Remember, it would be like, dude, just whiz verb it, man. Just turn that up.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But there's no, I mean, the hardest thing to do with music, and I think it goes for any production, but particularly for like big epic music, is to do big and dry. It's so easy just to use distortion or verb to make it sound big, but you lose the definition and it just sounds unprofessional. So I think a huge part of what we discussed about in relationship to the room as well is really to find a room that has a professional, tight sound up front, really, really strong when it needs to be, but also has all the subtle flavors, much more intimate sound, much closer. So yeah, let me go on. There's questions and questions and questions. One of the things I'm often missing in other libraries is that they only have one kind of portamento legato, which is usually rather slow and strong. So almost always when I have a little glissando, I have to play this big portamento. And I think there's a good point there actually, Colin. Like for me, the portamentos, I used to think they're awesome because you could kind of hear the legato, and once you learn, it's so rare to use that very slow glissando kind of string transition. So I think there's definite value in terms of considering the length of portamento or controllability of the portamento as well.
Yeah, it can be a little forced. I mean, it was really fun for like Asian cues and things for initially, but yeah, it gets overused inherently too. So yeah, I definitely think it kind of harkens back to what we already talked about, which is in terms of having the patch respond to speed, which I mean, there's been a lot of advancements in our industry in that area, but certainly with sensory strings, that's what the legatos need to do. They need to be adaptable and not limiting. And so if you have a long portamento, you should be able to control the speed of it for sure.
Yep. Another question from Henrik relates to a rider rebowing, please. And I think one thing we've definitely considered and discussed a lot is to figure out how you can get natural rebowing. So for example, you hold down your sustain key. Every time you click the key, you get a natural bow variation, which is kind of logical and the most common motion an orchestra or string orchestra does. And yet it's actually never been sampled. We dabble with it doing round robin legato on Adagio, but I know, Colin, it's certainly something we consider more for century strings as well.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of same note legato, or yeah, I mean, it even extends to there's a connectivity to spiccatos.
Yeah.
When they're played rapidly, and how do you? So I would say, I mean, without getting into too much detail, that's really a word. I mean, when you do this, you're inevitably looking at what's out there, what we've done, what other people have done, and how do you take the next step so it's worthwhile. It's not just a retread.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge thing. Repetition within legato, rebowing, fast repetitions, and then also the connectivity of spiccato. Like, how do you get beyond just the kind of the hey, we did lots of round robins, but there's something more in the connectivity of when in a live group plays. So
absolutely,
yeah.
And it definitely involves new techniques, Henrik, as well, that we are looking into in terms of really understanding the more complicated parts of what's happening in a live session. I think one of the issues with string sampling in the past has been most developers have a mathematical approach to it. And if you look at an orchestra, particularly when they start playing faster, there's inherent variation in the sound, and it's not just round robin based, it's also related to pitch and dynamics and variety of other things. There's just so much complexity happening, and if you approach that too mathematically, you get a mathematical result. And I think that's one of the reasons that most of the markups we hear today sort of sound sterile. It's actually not so much always the composer's fault, but it's also the sample's fault for just being too sterile. And if you have a sterile session, and you will certainly have a sterile output in the end. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. And but I guess the other side to that, I mean, we've learned this because it's in our soul. Like, everything has to have emotion. I mean, it's just that's our point of view, for better or worse. It always has been.
Yeah.
But as you said, and I think the real valuable lesson is to be systematic still, but not clinical in your recording. Like you really have to be disciplined that you're getting emotion, because it doesn't happen by accident. Usually, if you let it go, it just sucks. That's pretty much what you can guarantee. Unless you push it, it's just going to suck.
Sure.
Because they just look at that single note on the page, and that's what you get. So you really have to push the musicians, and I think we've kind of learned how to do that through the years.
It's so funny, man. Like, and you can, I mean, you can hear it in the library instantly. Ours or others, doesn't matter. You can hear. I think, having dabbled so much with samples as we have, you can hear the uninspired session in the sample. You can just hold down one key and you can hear whether it's going to work or not. It's really at that point.
Oh yeah.
Sustained samples.
Oh yeah, and you always, and then the other side of it too is the intangible luck.
Yeah. Like
you said, like sampling gold that pops up, like certainly in Majestica we get a lot of that, but some other things haven't worked out as we thought. So you just, it's just about, just gotta, and I almost think on some level the holy grail, you have to be willing to keep doing this. In every iteration, you get better, you hear on a different level, and you learn from mistakes. And I think we're clearly, how many years in are we in this thing? So that's really what it is. I mean, I love selling things. I'm all about capitalism, but I think the core of it is I want the strings I want. Yeah. And it seems each time we get closer and closer. Yeah. So it's just kind of about pursuing that as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's almost the same notion, and I think most people that is hearing us talk right now can relate to this. You make a piece of music, you listen to it 2 years after, and you see all the small details you didn't get right. And sampling is exactly the same. We're just creating the pre sort of stages of that. But there's no doubt about that. And it's an interesting education of the ear, because for me at least, it really relates to subtlety. Whereas in the beginning it related to loudness and epicness and all that stuff, which we've done to the 11th degree. But now it's more like, I remember I had a conversation with Elfman last year where we talked about sampling, relating to, he's really much more interested in finding that the playable spectrum of samples, not really so interested in the fortissimo aspect of it. And I think there's some really interesting lessons to be carried over for us in terms of understanding more of that subtle playable range. And people have worked with it obviously for even more years than we have, all dialing back to what it's really about, the emotion, but also the actual playing range of the orchestra, not always going super big. And another thing, Colin, one thing I've learned through you is actually, because I've always been pushing for having more players, and we went ballistic on AW and Majestica on that, but taking a step back, that one trumpet can sound louder than 10. And by using also common orchestration techniques, you can definitely enhance those aspects as well. So more is not necessarily more when it comes to these things.
No, I definitely agree. I think you need to have. I mean, it's called the VC ensemble building, whatever you want to do, but particularly, I think it applies to both brass and strings. You got to have control and be able to build the sections, and not versus the idea that, oh, I have a big section, so it's going to be lush. Well, it will, but they'll also be smeared when you try to write harmony. So it's just, I think this Century Strings is definitely about more detail and more flexibility, but it's certainly not a chamber approach at all, but it is, I do think we need to have those building blocks for detail, for sure.
Sure. Benedict Nichols writes, the Adagio and Agitato series are amazingly useful. Please don't dumb down the controllability of the libraries. If anything, give more within the patch, not necessarily more patches to achieve things. If you're going to create an entire section of patches which would be useful, please do so in common orchestral layouts, high to low, left to right, then cellos in the center and second violins on the right. So I suppose he's speaking about also a perspective, like which perspective we're going towards. I think in my experience, it's best to give people the tools to choose what they want instead of doing forced perspective. It also creates things, it makes it a lot easier for us in terms of really getting a more smooth transition. We obviously, as people point out with Adagio as well, we record in a very lush, complicated space that create a lot of complexities in the sound. But with the new space we have, it's a little more controllable, but they're awesome tools for getting completely the right perspective. But recording it forced, I'm not 100% sure about.
I mean, there's almost no question we're not going to do that.
Sure.
We're gonna be centered, but we need to provide in the interface and even in presets things that are set up. Because to me, I mean, we say like, hey, man, I can pan this myself. It's easy. I don't know that everybody.
Oh no, I don't think that. And
gets that. So we need to really set up the library so it is natural. You know, they have that option versus just Adagio. We didn't really do that. We just kind of had like, this is what it is.
Yeah. Oh, totally. No, I absolutely agree with that. And I think even myself, I've actually never used the sort of traditional layout, but I think for me, I've just listened to a lot of scores lately, and it really does help in getting a better mix, having things laid out the right way. There's a lot of tools inside of Contact that can be used for that. Obviously, there are other tools as well for creating that right sort of dimension in the sound. So you're absolutely right. It really needs to come within the library. And I think it's also another aspect, and a lot of questions we've gotten is sort of like, what style are we trying to achieve with this library? With brass, obviously, if we could describe them two ways, is almost from Williams to Zimmer. And I think that the idea with the strings is to do have that similar width in sound. So you can go from much more classical type to almost more synthetic type of sounds. We really want to do our best to do both. And that does involve working around with perspective, providing EQ settings, stuff that is more ready to go out of the box. So people don't have to fiddle too much with it, because there's some awesome, relatively simple tricks that you can use to get the whole thing sounding better out of the box.
I think we've neglected, like we've always said, hey, it's not that big a deal, but we never took the next step. And like I honestly prefer to position things myself.
Yeah.
But we need to take that step and incorporate it into the interface of the library for sure.
Oh, there's no doubt. Benedict also lastly says, how about measured trills up to the 4th and the 5th and make good use of Time Machine Pro? Yeah, trills.
No, I mean, they're very nice textures, and I think we would definitely consider that. Again, for me, it really soft dynamics. I do like that. It's kind of a feathery shimmer. I like that a lot.
Johan Back Monel asks, I would like a really smooth but also fast legato for big string ensemble, both pianissimo to forte and attack and everything in between. So sort of talking about the playable range again, but also the ability to play fast legato.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's the bar right now. Even with other orchestral libraries out there, it's a legato patch that can cover all the bases from playing slow up to fast, up to runs, and different types of transitions, whether it's slurred or rebowing the transition. Yeah. So yeah, no, I think that's what we're going to do. It'll be a very flexible patch. I would say, but our emotional approach perfected. That's kind of how I would sum it up. Like there's great advantages to the emotional sampling of Adagio, but we didn't quite understand how to put it all together. Sure. And it can be a little overwhelming for some people. So
sure, and for us as well, actually.
I mean, it was. I don't regret it, but it's we tried a lot of stuff, and a lot of it worked, and some of it didn't.
Johannes also speaking about polyphonic legato and portamento throughout airs, long and sustained and marcato.
Yeah, gosh, I would love, like, that's the how often have we talked about the polyphonic legato? And to this point, what I've seen in contact-based libraries is it has not really been done. I've seen some Andrew Coresti's smart guy. I believe it's a utility outside of Contact built in, and whatever. More power to him. He's a very smart guy, and he's done a great job. But as far as directly in Contact on its own, I haven't seen it. Or I've seen it faked.
Exactly. We've seen other developers do, and we've actually done it ourselves as well, having scripted type of legato, and people say, oh, they got polyphonic, but it's actually not true polyphonic legato. It's a scripted type, mixing different components. So we
would every scripting candidate we talk to, that's the first thing we ask them.
Yeah, totally.
And we've had, we would absolutely love to have it. Yeah. And we will try. I don't know if it's possible, or we may need
no,
to.
it's been our biggest dream and nightmare at the same time for
I
so
know
many years.
it is, and so maybe we're not smart enough. I don't know, but it may require like I said, a third party, a utility outside of Contact.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, and we could. And that's definitely we're definitely going to do our very best to approach this issue, and a third party utility could be one of the options we could use. Johan is also speaking to including all options and Sordino in the patches as well. And I think for me, Sordino has been vastly overlooked and poorly reproduced with most libraries as sort of as an afterthought. For me, it's I wouldn't say it's half of all the strings, but it's close to that range in terms of how common it is in soundtracks and the ability to mix. If you look at Newman, for example, most commonly using Sordino, but mixed with a tad of normal strings as well. So it's absolutely important. I think it's one of the things we just have to get right. I think we definitely got close to it in terms of our Agitato Sordino volume, which I think is one of our really strong libraries. But we will definitely be doing it for this one as well. It's just it cannot be mimicked with convolution, reverb, and EQ and all that. It has to be done the right way.
No, and for me, it's probably equally important.
Yeah.
Like in terms of priorities. I mean, it's not to say that the articulation depth will be the same.
No.
I mean, there's things, you're probably not going to go as crazy on spiccato depth or things, but
Sure.
like, as far as lush, true espressivo Sordinos, I mean, that's probably number one on my list for what I want to accomplish. But then the other thing is Sordino just inherently can be sluggish.
Yeah.
And it can't be. It with the live group, it's not. So the samples need to be, have some agility to them, for sure.
Yeah,
but I'd put that, for me, that's number one. To be honest.
Yeah.
Nail that.
Yeah, and it's important. It's really, and it's one of those things. It's kind of, and Johan, just so you understand, like, the matter. So it's a single question. There's include all options. So okay, there's 7 words in your proposal, and it adds 50% more in sample time. So it's interesting with these things because there's just certain, and just to give you an idea about like how massive it is, we're recording for about 2 months, and almost half of that time will be spent with Sordinos. So it's just one of those things. It sounds simple, but in terms of the complexity of us doing it, it's just it's one. And we've obviously been debating this in great length, and we just have to do it the right way. Johan also continues, include auto divisi intelligently distributing the notes among the players to enhance realism.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to the same thing we just discussed with polyphonic legato, and again, not what I think we all envision in our head as polyphonic, true, intelligent, splitting voices. There's still some rules and limitations that are involved, but we'd love to do it. We hope we're smart enough to do it.
Yeah.
If we're not smart enough, we're trying to find people smarter than us.
Yeah.
Which there's a lot of people out there that are. So I'm not positive that we'll be able to crack that one.
And I'm personally, because we see the request a lot, and I think it's very common for people who works for sample libraries that they want ultimate control. So ideally you would have one player playing and then you have 12 iterations of that patch. The problem is that it doesn't sound that great. So sometimes we want to have options. We want to have individual players, like we were doing, like, 11 violins would be 11 times the recording time to do it that way. But actually, I've still to hear something where, like, okay, this is totally a way to go, because the isolation, the fact they're recorded at different times with different like a different sensation, different mood, whatever it is, it just creates so much inconsistency in the sound. But on the flip side of that, I think there are ways where we can get close to creating that sound, but in a much more cohesive way, where you really do get the sound of the group you want, but without getting the totally overlayered, super plastered sound as well. So there's great value to the suggestion, and I think there's a sweet spot in there that we're probably going to do our best to attempt. And I think we've found it, Colin, in terms of the actual size of it, and the different ways we're going to lay it out. That's going to be something like that, but probably not in the typical way people have seen it so far.
No, yeah, and I mean, sometimes if you give people these options sound great, but then in practice they can be clunky, and I think that the number one thing, if we can't make it simple and easy to use, like right out of the gate, then we probably have to rethink it. I think that's the most important thing, is just musical and simple, I think.
Totally. Jeroen Kajero Rajir, which I'm sure I pronounced totally wrong, asked about controllable rebowing. And we talked about that. We absolutely have that. It's so vital. For me, it's mind-blowing. And I'm sorry, I'm just repeating myself, but no library so far has been able to just do it. We did it with the Lurays, and we're obviously going to make a much more easy version of that. But it is the most common motion. And the problem with samples is that when they start forcing your composition too much, you sort of dictate the type of music you can do. And I think one of the issues with most of the libraries out there is that they dictate that kind of composition where you have, for example, you can't do repeated legatos, so your melody has to change every time you do a note. So you can't do da 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 da. I mean, it's just something like, and it's like, wow, that is so common. Like, take the Harry Potter theme, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can't do that. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, no, same note, legato, repetitions, and I would say, like, I've always had this sense. I mean, our libraries as well, except for with the exception of the Luray stuff. I always feel a disconnect between legato and short notes.
Yeah.
And there's like this sweet spot in between. Excuse me, that I think we need to really hit.
Sure.
So it's not, and certainly a big part of that is same note repetitions.
Yeah. Yep. Totally. Joran's second question relates to, like Benedict mentioned, repeated slurred notes, but even moderately to fast legato arpeggiations and lines. I don't know a single library in existence that is even remotely approached this sound. So, but even moderately to fast legato arpeggiations and lines. So I assume, if I understand correctly, like he's talking about playable arpeggiations in terms of legato fashion.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, I mean, it's sort of like, as I mentioned, you really do need to have a full range of legato, from the lyrical espressivo stuff to kind of moderate fast tempos to up to more arpeggio run building type of legato. You really have to have all of it.
Sure.
And that's the intention. But I'm not sure if he's speaking, maybe he's thinking more phrase material, like the Village solo violin, or
and I think, regardless of what he's asking something great. My interpretation of it is also, it's not just that we have all the different type of legatos, because we've done that and other developers have that right now, where we have adaptive legato, which we have in our agitato series as well. But I think it's also, when I play with the adaptive stuff, it works, but it's too strong. Like, it all sounds very strong. And if you listen to the nimbleness of Williams, how soft and smooth those transitions are, I think that's perhaps more important to go next gen. That it's not just that it's adaptive, we sort of got that down, but it's also that it has that natural playfulness in it. That it's not just big and loud and has that weird gritty, too strong kind of sound, but it's completely fluent. You have the natural imperfection, so you can do your runs. And then there's probably a part of this as well, Colin, to your point, that relates to, like, there are certain things that are so fast and involve so much imperfection that it's going to require some intelligent way of doing very controllable phrase sampling. I mean, there's only certain, we can't legato sample something that fast. His third question is, I personally prefer a smaller sound. There's plenty of super huge libraries sections out there. I'm still waiting for the library that nails the beautiful, intimate, still aggressive sound of small ensembles.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, and I mean, the proof will be in the library, but I think you need both. Yeah, and I think that's our plan, is to have both and have some degree of section building. Yeah, and control. I think that's very important.
Sure. Jan Reinders. I love the dynamic arcs in your libraries, but I find them quite limiting, not being able to switch notes during the arc. Right now, the chord has to be fully played and all that, and that's absolutely true. I think, Colin, we're definitely gonna, the whole approach to arc is gonna, we're still gonna retain a lot of it. I think we found quite a lot of use in it, and a lot of our users love it, but it definitely needs to be more controllable. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's something we'll be looking into. The current trick to do that right now, just with Adagio, if you want to do it, is to have two patches open, and you essentially crossfade between whatever melodic changes you do. So at the midpoint of the chord, you dive down the volume of whatever note you want, and then you use the other patch to dive up the note change as well, and then you get that kind of approach. But you're totally right. It should just work off the keys.
Yeah, no, but I think the process you just described will be built into the software, and there'll be tempo syncing, that sort of thing. So everything.
Yeah. Colin, I suppose we'd be using the same as we do for the polyphonic phrase legato for the studio sopranos. It would be a similar technique where you actually just play it fluently, which is one of the greatest additions we've created this year.
Yeah, no, I think, but the main thing is being able to control it to some extent. I can understand just making, because the arcs sound great. You can't beat it, but doing everything we can to make them more flexible.
Yeah.
I think that's the plan.
Totally. So the next question is by Jiwan An. I hope this project aims to work with soloist ensemble string library and utilizing the same UI algorithm and programming capacity. Whether you're a separate soloist or ensemble library is completely up to your genius minds. And he's touching upon something important. Solo divisi.
Yeah. So yeah. We've the soloist. We've already been working on that for quite some time, and continuing to record. And
I have to. No, sorry. Go on. I'm interrupting.
No, you go ahead.
I'm really proud of what you figured out in terms of solo string sampling, because it's really, we have the first fucking awesome sounding solo violin ever done that actually just sounds beautiful, and you can play Schindler's. Sorry, I just had to say that because I think it's a massive achievement. I really do.
And but yeah, so I would say, solo strings. I don't know. To this point, they've almost been like their separate thing, or if they're done in like we did them in Adagio, we do them as best we can, but we didn't put the same time in. That just wasn't possible. That is not the case with Century Strings. It's crazy depth on everything is basically it in a complete package, not 20 different piecemeal things that we do over time. It's like boom, this is it, comprehensive, let's go, sort of a thing. And I think the other thing he's referring to is just a consistent workflow interface, like for all the instruments. And I think there are some other developers done a great job with that, and I think that's what people need, and that's the plan. That across, Century Brass, strings, and who knows what else is coming, that it's consistent. Yeah,
totally. And it's definitely one of the critiques we've gotten over time with some of our larger and more complex libraries is sort of that, also because they were developed over a span of time, that people didn't feel they were consistent enough, whether it's doing 120 different arcs, which we actually did, or 40 different true legatos, like we not just reprogram, but actually, we went totally overboard, and there's definitely some lessons learned in terms of structure and from a UI point of view as well. Do you want to also ask about repeated bowing notes? We've gone through that. Smart divisi, we've gone through. Legato and everything, both tremolo, sol ponticello, sol tasto, anything utilizes sustained notes. Legato and everything.
Probably, I would say everything. But I mean, I think he's like Berlin. Some of the others have done that, and to me, some of it doesn't translate. Yeah. Some of it does. So I would say do legato where it's emotional and it makes sense, but don't do it just as a spec. I don't think I'm not huge on some of the sol tasto stuff I've heard. I'm like, it just seems dead. So anyway, we're at an early point, and we haven't nailed down this articulation list by any means. That's kind of why we're putting this out to help the community out there kind of help us shape it. But I would say not everything under the sun legato.
Nope. I think really also, with Adagio in particular, as I said, I think we had 36 or 40 different legatos, and it was obviously way too much, even for us to digest, I think, at a point. So there's no doubt that it will be boiled down to really what's going to be really playable, but also has to sound good. So I think developers have a tendency to force articulations together that don't necessarily match. And I think we're going to stay in what really sounds good. And not necessarily try to force program something, and that's not the intention. We want to do something that sounds really real, instead of forcing and creating things that, for example, one of the common questions and I'm sure we're going to get it here as well, but it relates to people want non-vibrato to vibrato patches, and obviously we're going to do that as well. But non-vibratos are quite uncommon articulation in the string. It doesn't happen that often. But it's funny that people, again, it goes back to that control measure. Oh, we need to have it, but it's very rare you see. Unless they're playing the open string, that somebody just sits. There's always some intention.
No, I mean, it's funny you say that. Even the solo violinist that we've been recording, he's a virtuoso concert master of. Anyway, I'll name drop later. But when I was doing the legato cycle with him, one of who knows how many we've done at this point, but I said to do it non-vibrato. It was very difficult for him to do that. Sure. He's like, I've been playing for 30 years, and it just seems like I'm not a natural thing to do. I mean, it's not to say, of course you play non-vibrato sometimes, but I'm just saying it's a I don't know, a gateway to something else usually versus.
I think so, and it's kind of funny. Also, all the techniques that actually have to create vibrato for open strings, whether it's shaking the instrument or bending the string a little bit to attempt to create legato, vibrato on the open strings. His fifth question from Jiwan relates to every single short note articulation, spiccato, staccato, conlenio, bartok, and all that. And you'll have that in abundance. I happen to be a great lover of short notes.
Troels, all about the short notes, and Troels, but also again we touched on it briefly, and it would be more later. But the connectivity of the short notes. Yeah. So you have to do tons of round robins. You that's a given. Yeah. Because they're very useful. But then there is a lot of innovation coming in terms of the connectivity of short notes, and that's, I don't know if you want to elaborate or more on that later.
Oh, absolutely. I was about to joke with the pizzicato legato, which we've always discussed. Boo! But
we tried. We tried.
We did. But no, it is very true. The problem is, and again, this is where the samples force styles of music. When you hear people use short notes today, there's a do-do-do-do-do, like, they're very simple, and there's so much more that can be done, particularly playing them a lot faster than their sort of normal, like epic tempo. And I think, again, the samples dictate because the length of many of these notes is too long, or there's too much precision in the samples. You don't get, when you really see the orchestra play fast, there's a lot, particularly when it's a change notes, there's a lot of natural imperfections. Like, I was listening to E.T. yesterday, and in the very beginning of Adventures on Earth, the orchestra go like, duh, 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 and there's so much imperfection because they can hardly hit them. But there's that natural legato transition in the notes as well. So it's super important to cover that. So you get that it's not just short notes, but it's short notes with intentions. So that's easier to do with legato, and it's harder to do with short notes. But it really relates to a variety of things we've covered today in terms of sessions, players, casting, room, sample techniques, a variety of things so we can get more into it. Also using more microscopic sample components, which is something we will probably go into a little later down the road in terms of describing what we're also thinking about with Century in terms of using very small components of samples, sort of venturing. We don't call it sample modeling, more of a fusion modeling type of method using traditional deep sampling techniques and aspects from sample modeling to create some of that. His sixth question relates to runs, strings runs. I hope you can make it a programmable one, not just pre-recorded runs. And Colin, we've obviously experimented a lot with that as well. I think both is probably the right answer.
Yeah, I think you have to have both. So yeah, that's what we'll have.
Yeah, because again, Jiwan, if you can try to imagine, you want to have playable runs, which is in legato fashion when they're played. How are you going to play like when they do really fast triplets? There's no way you can sample that. Just the decay of the room between 1 to 2 notes is too much. So you're going to have to invent other sample techniques that we're looking into in terms of what I just described as well. G1 is also touching upon effects. Effects would be nice. I don't expect the level of cage, but you know what I mean. Especially something with individual section, not just as tutti. Effects would be awesome. I think we created the largest collection of effects ever done in Cage, and it's going to match really well with Century
Yeah, it
as
is.
well.
Oh, absolutely it will.
So I think we'll probably we probably won't go totally crazy on that, Colin. I don't know what you're thinking.
Yeah, no, it's just like even going back to the balancing act of the whole thing and what the priority things like Sordino and true expressivo and the legato depth that you need, and then coupled with when I look at what we did with Cage, I don't know what more I would do, or what more would you do? I don't know. It's just we went pretty deep on that. We have discussed at one point. We say, hey, let's go do Divisi Cage. Let's take this, the same crazy effects and do them in small sections. And I wouldn't rule that out, but I don't think it's this particular product at this moment.
I'm not totally sure, but there'll be definitely. I mean, I think one thing we could do is to also use some of the common articulations and perhaps create systems around them. So you have a cluster generator, or I mean, there are a lot of things that could be done. But I think the idea is really that Cage first and foremost, until somebody takes and lift that bar notably higher than we've done. I think we're okay.
Yeah, and even stuff like that. I don't know. It would be different, not necessarily better. And a Cage it will blend perfectly with the new strings for sure.
Totally. Okay, so let me move on here to Adam Weber. A deep sample for Tando and Saltasto articulations would be excellent in addition to what you've already accomplished in Adagio.
Mm-hmm. No, for me, the flautando stuff is very interesting. I feel like it's not been done emotively yet by any developer. Sure. So that would be the one thing. It's not enough just to. It's very tough. I mean, it's almost like make the harmonic that you're playing expressive. So it's it's delicate. And as I said, I'm not. If we can't make it sound emotive and expressive, we're probably not going to spend a lot of time on it. Nope. That's the only caveat I would say. But I'm very interested in the flautando stuff in particular. Saltasto, we got to look more at that. As I said, this articulation list we're still kind of sussing it out and figuring out what the priorities are for sure.
His second question goes to polyphonic auto ostinato arpeggiate. Hold on, this is a long sentence. Polyphonic auto ostinato arpeggio builder arranger with a GUI similar to synth step sequences that includes velocity and note length and possibly stacked articulations. So this is actually interesting. We've done that and we're working on it to figure out a way to create a true ostinato tool, which is obviously going to tie into the whole Century concept as well. So that's definitely coming. There's a lot of things we've learned in terms of understanding how different lengths of notes create different types of music. So if you want to do ostinato, if they play at 90 or 140 and so forth, there are actually different sort of styles and lengths of the notes and all that stuff. And I'm not so big on trying to mimic or emulate that in Contact. I'm more big on actually just recording all the different parts of it so you have something that sounds fairly natural to the tempo you're playing. So there's gonna be a lot more coming on that. It's an absolutely point. For me, being a short note lover, I would love like the ultimate ostinato tool, and that's exactly what we're doing. Paul Haskell is asking, I'm actually pleased to hear you guys are revisiting strings. Adagio is great, but doesn't take advantage of advancements since. So please include the same note transitions like rebowing like you did with the electric violin. And with the electric violin, he's referring to our fusion modeling techniques, which we just mentioned that we're going to incorporate into Century as well. Having different velocity layers for same note transitions from soft to aggressive rhythm playing would be great. And I agree with that. He's also alluding to tremolo legato. And again...
Yeah, no, it's nice. I just don't... You have to look at... Again, that would be a tempered thing, too. Like, I think of harmonic tremolos, like the opening of Elfman Spider-Man. Those little creepy... Like that legato, something like that would be nice. But... just standard tremolo legato, like if you like a forte version,
Yeah.
probably not that useful.
Sure. It's funny with the opening of the Spider-Man thing, by the way. I'm always like, because I think it's one of the coolest openings, and he was sort of the first one to go into the whole, ostinato trend. But it's so funny how the bongo is so offbeat in the first couple of notes. It's it's kind of messy actually when you listen, but that's the aesthetic of it. It would never happen today. Today it would have been ultra tight, and there's something beautiful about the untightness of it. Because it's a one-trick sample, so it sounds kind of standard. He also said it would be great to have the ability to tweak the speed of portamento legato instead of just cutting into the sample.
Yeah, no, I think. Well, yeah, I mean, whether it's time machine or just, I think, depth in the amount of performances that you record, so your playing speed or your DAW tempo can determine which transition is triggered.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point.
And the ability to control and tweaking the speed of arcs and bowings. And
I think that's similar to what we discussed.
Yeah. It's so important. I mean, because we know we got something right with the arcs, but we also know we didn't get the right symmetry, so they're hard to control and all that stuff. So I think absolutely, it's just so important. It's important for us as well. Because you're not the only one faced with the sort of occasional frustration of not being able to fully control it. So we're with you. Views Music is talking about, I think we really need some more realistic and controllable divisi features that expand on the two halves of the violin section. For instance, I may want one half of the violins to play a single melody, and I want the rest to start a harmony a few hours later. And I think perhaps that alludes to whether we're going to have second or first violins as well.
Oh yeah, no, we certainly will.
And actually sample them as well, so not just program them.
No. Yeah, there's definitely two different sections, which is different from what we did with Adagio and Agitato.
Yep. Another thing to consider is double stopping considerations. Would it be possible to have control for double stop notes?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rule that out. Again, I mean, it at a point, it comes down to priorities and how flexible and useful something is, whether it makes the cut or not. But I think we should look at that for sure.
Totally. And he ends by asking, by the way, will there also be a harp as a part of the string library, or is that only a feature? Okay, maybe I'm misunderstanding. I'm actually going to reinterpret the question as whether we're going to do harps or not. That's one of the best ways.
It's already done.
Yeah, it is.
Already on the, I mean, not, there's the age harps, but also we have solo harps are coming.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about that later.
Totally. And lastly, here on Facebook, we have Nuno Malo, who's asking for me, the one thing I would love to see about center strings is something that's never been done before in any string library, as far as I'm aware of. It is something similar to dynamic patches in Adagio library had. I love the patch had the dynamic crescendo, diminuendo, but can you change to another note? Okay, so that's essentially the question we got earlier on. Yeah, so you'll be able to do that. Totally.
Yeah, but making, like we always say it, there's just natural emotional gestures that sound way better than anything you're going to do on a mod wheel, but how do you make those flexible? And I think that's really the territory you're talking about with the whole next gen string library. So we totally agree.
Playable arcs, baby. That's what it's all about.
Yes.
And it's so
playable
true.
legato within arcs, yeah.